Good evening, everybody. Pete Morris. We are doing the ComancheZOOM for January 14th. This is a continuation of the winter flying series, icing, winter flying, and survival. Tonight, we're concentrating on the rest of the incidents or difficulties with ice and flying in that situation. There's been some comments over the past couple of weeks here about us encouraging people to fly in the ice, which we're trying not to do. It's more of a case of how to recognize ice as a possibility, and if you do get into it, how to get out of it. So hang on, hang to your hat. Here we go in winter flying, ice, winter flying, and survival.
And Pete, this is, and everybody, this is CJ Stump. Just a quick request for correction. The folks who are facilitating this week are include and on the 17th of December when Winter Flying 1 happened, include Kristin Winter, who is an ANPIA CFII MEI Twinkie driver and Part 135 operator. And then today, George Richmond, who is one of the another ANPIA CFII MEI form, ATP, and very experienced Comanche instructor. So I wanted to just let people know that, because what's written there is actually not reflective of the people. And I wanted to just let people know that we've got quite an amazing group of experienced instructors and Comanche pilots with a lot of winter time. So with that said, I figured, Pete, sometimes I know you can dynamically fix things.
I will try, but I'm not gonna, I don't think I'll get back to that. I do want to go one step further though. This is the one that she's talking about fixing, these names. But what I want to do is make sure that everybody is aware of the setup to get, if you want to do wings credit. This is it. It just closed. I'm sorry. Try to get it back again. There we go. Make it a little easier to read. Tonight, this is possibly of wings credit. Go to the Northeast Comanche org website. On the upper the first page, there's a click Zoom, a link to the ComancheZOOM page. Partway down, there is a registration form link. Fill that out. Put in your name, your phone, your email. There's also a place you can put in your hometown, and then check the wings credit box and click send. Then, most important, if you do that and you want to get the credit, rename yourself on the Zoom so that it matches the name that you put in up here for the wings registration form. That will help Robert get the job done. Otherwise, he has to spend a lot of time. He just finally got some people cleared for back in November because he couldn't match up the name and the time on their thing. So here we go. Now we can go back to the usual. Okay, I'm busy clicking people in. CJ, you want to do your thing?
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. So welcome to the hangar flying part of winter flying and survival. Pop in and say who you are, where you are, and what you fly. And just a quick note, in reviewing the NTSB statistics for Comanches, it became clear that winter flying and icing really could include carb ice and induction icing, and that can occur at temperatures up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're all here for winter flying and survival, pretty much no matter where we fly. But yeah, so hop in, say who you are, where you are, and what you fly, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul. I'm from Yorkton, Saskatchewan, and as everybody down there knows, we do winter flying 10 months of the year.
Welcome, Paul, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm in Vermont, where I can really sympathize.
Yeah, Vermont, they do summer flying for about a week and a half.
Right, and hope we don't miss that this year.
Right, exactly.
Myself and another gentleman who should be joining us as well, we own a PA-30.
Brilliant. Welcome, and good to have the Twinkie drivers. Thanks for being here, Paul.
Well, good to be with you guys.
Well, I'm Ravi. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. And I used to own a 71 PA-24 C model, which I sold a couple of years ago and highly regret it. So I went and bought me a 69 PA-30 and another 68 PA-30 as a project. So I would always have one flying, you know. And this past weekend, a buddy of mine asked me to fly him to Syracuse. You know, now I live, you know, in Charlotte. I'm a Southern boy. So imagine spending the night in Syracuse and coming back the next day. I'm like, man, I need to get my winter flying skills up to date. So here I am.
Ravi, welcome back. And this one is for you.
Okay.
Thanks for being here and welcome to the Multi-Club. You're in good company.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mike Kalani. I don't know if this is working yet. Can people
It
hear
is. Gotcha.
Loud and clear,
It is.
Mike.
Okay, Mike Kalani. I'm in Prescott, Arizona. Spent most of my life on the East Coast, New York and California. And interestingly enough, the worst icing conditions I ever had were at 5,000 feet over LA. So anyway, I've got a lot of experience, over 9,000 hours in a PA-30.
Did you say, Mike Kalini, over 9,000 hours in a PA-30?
That's correct.
You are one of our highest time Comanche pilots in the world. Thank you for being here. It's an honor.
But
Welcome.
I've been here before and I only join when I think I can contribute, and icing is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm a CFI, double I, and a fast team guy. So I said, this one I can join and maybe contribute. I've had some serious icing situations that were interesting, and I learned lessons from all of them.
Mike, thanks again. And actually, well, first of all, please feel free to jump in with the other facilitators with that kind of experience and with the CFII, et cetera, and being a fast team rep. Had I really had that in the front of my mind, you would have received me trying to arm twist you into trying to join, but please jump in. And I know you will, but I'm delighted you're here. Thank you.
Thanks.
And everybody jump in, say who you are, where you are, and what you fly.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Phil Simiatowski. I fly a Turbo Arrow out of Owasso, Michigan.
You're definitely, Phil, in the key icing areas. So welcome. Michigan is like icing central this time of year. Well, glad you're here.
Thank you.
Hey,
Hello, my name's.
Oh, sorry, jumped on somebody. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Hello, my name's Jamie Nedrowski from a little place called Port Dover, Ontario, Canada, on the North Shore of Lake Erie. And I own a PA-24 250, 1959. Fairly new to the Comanche world. I've had it for a couple of years and I have about 80 hours in it. And I'm playing catch up on all these Zoom calls. I've been watching hours and hours of previous editions. So really looking forward to tonight. Thank you.
Welcome, Paul, and Jamie, and thank you for being here. It's so great to have the Canadians be so well represented, because a lot of this series was kicked off by at the Thanksgiving Zoom, where there were like half a dozen Canadians saying, yeah, we had Canadian Thanksgiving earlier. And that amazing discussion about winter flying conditions in Canada and survival really was like, okay, this series has to happen. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Hey guys, good evening or afternoon, as it may be. I'm Matthew Smith. I'm based out of California, Los Angeles, and currently up in Mammoth Lakes. I was a regular at the beginning of this, and I've missed quite a few because I've been flying a lot up in the mountains. So this is a pretty relevant session for me. I also, let's see, well, I fly a 1966 PA-260B. I think I am getting 500 hours in that thing. I put like 500 hours in a engine that was overhauled in 1988 and hasn't been didn't fly for about years. So I guess I've gotten lucky there with that maintenance on that thing. The thing I do, speaking of maintenance, is I run the Piper Comanche documents project, pipercomanche.info and docs.northeastcomanche.org. I'm always on a quest to collect as much information on these wonderful machines as I possibly can. Cool, there's some Twinkie drivers on here because I'm after Twinkie data. I've restarted getting a few more of the owner's manuals for the Twinkies, including I just received from Bob the first model Twinkie owner's manual, and I think another owner on Facebook was going to send me the C models. So if anyone has a copy of the Piper owner's manual for the B turbos or the C turbo, I would love to get my hands on those. If you swing by the Comanche Data Project website, which I can post a link to in the chat, you'll see my wish list. And I now have added a link on the home page to a Dropbox. You can upload stuff without having to try and remember what my email address is. Other interesting things that have just transpired there, we started a museum with some great classic sales brochures that have been provided. I think Les and Bull provided some really cool stuff. I think it was in the last email update, there was a link to it, but I've kind of reformatted the pages and stuff from that sales brochure. So it's the 1958 Piper sales brochure with pretty high resolution scans. So that's kind of a neat thing. And I was hoping over time to collect all of those sales brochures. So if anyone has any of the old Piper Comanche sales brochures, that'd be a really neat thing to collect, especially because it happen to contain, or at least the 1958 one has the original paint schemes displayed there. So that's a pretty cool thing to see, especially for those to maybe get their paint touched up here in the near future, like myself. So yeah, anyway, that's me. Hello, everyone.
I've got a relatively nice copy of the brochure for the 400 coming soon. I can scan that in for you.
Yes, that would be amazing. I have that. I posted the link to the primary site. It's two different mirrors, and I keep them both in sync. They were a little out of sync for about a month because I did some reorganization, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't break all the links. But generally, both those sites have the same information, and the link to upload information is right there. Or you can free to email me if you want to chat about whatever you have. I'll put my email address in the chat, and so on the Facebook group.
Little quick request.
You've got the same plane as me.
Little quick request. Those of you that are not talking, would you carefully unmute? I'm sorry, mute yourself so we don't get so much background noise. We get a lot of clicks.
That was probably me clicking and typing while I was talking.
I don't think so, but yeah, thank you.
Alan, I think I heard you jumping in.
Yeah, I was just saying that I have lots of paperwork that I got with my plane. I've got a lot of the books, the original books. If anybody needs copies, any of this stuff, I've got a lot of it here. Because I got a lot of all the original paperwork. I got it with my plane when I got her, and it's a turbo as well, of course, twin Comanche turbo. Yeah, so if anybody needs anything from that, I've got some paperwork.
Yeah, if you have some stuff you want to scan and let me know, feel free to
I've got some,
shoot me an email and chat about it.
I've probably got some stuff that you could use. I don't know, but I've got a whole box of stuff here.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yep. And Alan, go ahead and pop in. We know you've got a twin Comanche, but you've got kind of an interesting story. Welcome. And, who you are, where you are, what you fly, what you will fly.
Well, it's actually being restored now at the moment, and I've rebuilt the whole nose compartment. So I've cleaned it up, repainted everything inside, removed all of the damage, all of the corrosion, everything that there was. The frame in the nose section, I took it out, did a full crack inspection, paint everything on it, all back in there, all new bearings, new new bushes, everything brand new. And like I have photos on Facebook. Those who are with me on Facebook, they can follow the restoration as it's going along. I fully rebuilt the nose wheel, nose gear, new chromes, everything like that. It's all going together, and that's going in hopefully next weekend. But unfortunately, with coronavirus, we're going to be confined again here from next weekend. So getting to the airfield and back is going to be a bit of a sneaky effort. I'll probably go on my motorcycle because I'm less likely to get stopped. But the idea is to go and install the nose gear, and once the nose gear is installed, then I'll be able to bring my plane to the place where I'm going to get it painted. And that's the next stage now, is to clean out the inside completely. I don't know if any of you have installed insulation inside your planes recently, but that's going to be my next big job, is to completely clean out the interior and install insulation. My plane was originally abandoned in the UK, and it had been lying in the bushes for about 15 years. And it was an airline pilot that was in training there at Bournemouth Airport in the UK. He told me about it. Oh, there's some kind of a thing there, a Comanche. And I thought, what? A Comanche? Oh yeah, I want it, you know? And the guy says, I don't know what it is, you know? I said, it's single engine or twin? I don't know. I said, okay, well, I started looking around. I eventually found it, and I found out the person was that owned it, and I managed to go there with some friends. We took the plane completely apart over 3 days and brought it back to France right here. And I'm rebuilding the entire plane right now.
That is
so there you
awesome.
go. Yeah, I know. It's a turbo like yours. It's the same. It's a 1967B. I don't know if I can share photos. I don't know how it works. I've never tried. Hold on. Yeah, hold
The
on.
best
Share.
bits of the story, Alan.
Yeah, I know. Hold on. I might have some funny photos I can share with you here. Oh yeah, this works. I don't know. Can you see this and this and this? Let me see. Yeah, I don't know. Can you see those?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. That's yeah. So yeah. That's part. You've got the nose frame that's gone in there in the last photo. So you can see it's all going in with new parts. What it looked like originally, it was really bad. Hold on a second. I'm going to find something else to share with you. Let me see. What else have I got? Oh yeah, that's the rebuild from. Yeah, this is the rebuild from the gear. This is where I rebuilt all the bits from the gear. So fully stripped the gear, inspection, crack inspection, then paint, and everything inside got rebuilt and corrosion treated, the whole lot. So it all looks good, and it's all gone together with new bushes and everything like that. What else have I got in here? I've got some more photos. Let me see. Let me see. What else have I got? Oh, I should have prepared this beforehand. Yeah, this is a good one. This shows you what it looked like originally. The little guy you see through the wheel well hole there is my son. So I don't know, can you see that? Yeah?
Yep.
Yeah, so that was the condition of the nose section beforehand. The actual frame itself, the nose frame, was completely rusty. It had lain idle for 15 years, and the whole lot had been invaded by bushes and mice and rodents of all kinds of sizes in there. So it wasn't it wasn't very nice. So there you go. And just one last picture maybe of the plane itself, what it looked like when I got it. It looked really bad, actually, very sad. This is it here. Let me see. Why am I clicking on it? It's not loading. Hold on a second. Where is it? Oh yeah, that's really bad. You know, can we do a video? Does that work? Let me see. Good. Yeah, that was it. Okay. How
And
about
actually,
that? Yeah, that was her. That was her, and this was me getting inside for the first time. And I had my wife's tools there to help me cut all the bushes away.
That is wow.
So there you go. That's the story.
What is
And,
what's the airport? What airport was that?
that's Bournemouth. It's the south of England.
Okay.
It's the south
Yeah,
coast of England.
okay.
So I had to get a ship there from the north of France, and I had a friend with a trailer that I was able to put the aircraft on and the wings all together. I have a photo of that as well, I can show you. Crazy trip with 2 other friends, and it took us 3 days, and I rented a hangar for the job, and that's it. So bit by bit, I've started restoring the plane. So I kept it for a year in storage, just an ordinary workshop. And then I brought it to an airfield to start working on it seriously. And I started collecting the bits, collecting the money most of all, because the parts are expensive, of course, and there you go. So now the 2 engines are away. The actual engines themselves are in really good condition. They don't really need anything, because the guys who had this, they stored it. So the engine wasn't just pickled, it was actually full of oil. I mean, like right to the top. You couldn't turn the propeller, right? Because the guys at the place, they'd actually even filled the cylinders. So everybody just thought that the engines were gone because they couldn't move the propellers.
Nice.
So, yeah, it was great. Now I'm going to change the cylinders anyway. I'm going to put on 8 new cylinders, even though the old cylinders are probably fine. I'm just going to put on new cylinders.
We are going to have you come back, Alan, because we've got a series of Comanche restorations Zooms that'll be happening.
Yeah,
But,
there's Amos. Well, you know Amos, it's in the group. He's doing the same as me. We were talking about all the stuff we were doing together, and he's done something that I'm going to have to do. Is that the torque tube job? I'm going to have to do that on mine. And I've been talking to the guys at Webco about that, and with Kristin as well. So I'm going to do that job probably the end of the summer. The object of the exercise now is to get the airframe fully painted, reassembled on its wheels with the gear that goes up and down and all of that stuff. And then eventually I'll start working on the tail section, clean up the inside, get the insulation in. So if I get to that stage by the end of the summer, then maybe by next winter, my engines will be ready to go on. I'm just going to do it bit by bit, yeah?
Well, I am going to say to people that you will be coming back to talk to us more about the tail of your airplane,
Yeah.
but I'm going to ask other people to jump in and say who they are, where they are, what they fly. And if you are here with dialed in, I want you to know that you can unmute by pressing *6 on your dial pad, and then you'll be able to talk. And then you can remute by pressing *6 again. So jump in.
Hear me?
Loud and
Can you
clear.
hear
Is that Raymond Venticinque?
Yes, I'm the Irishman, Raymond Venticinque, correct. How are you? Oh,
Welcome,
hello,
you made
everyone.
it in.
Yes, I've got a 1963 Comanche 250, which I love, although I'm still working very hard. I haven't had that much time to enjoy it. And this year it seemed to be, I ended up with a little bit of a problem. And the problem was we ended up with a lot of metal in my my oil filter. And you can jump in if anybody has extra knowledge. I really appreciate it. And so we've, this last 2 or 3 weeks, we took all the cylinders off one at a time because we felt as if it was the wrist pin caps. And so we did an inspection of one cylinder at a time. And when we got done, all 6 cylinders, the wrist pin caps were absolutely perfect. Nothing taken off of them. And so we had to analyze the rest of it. And I've come up with the realization that the oil cooler was original. It has, this is the 3rd engine in the plane, and the oil cooler was never changed. It was actually 1963. So I've just got through in the process of changing the oil cooler, and I'm hoping that that was the problem that was entering some of the chips of metal into my oil filter. So if anybody's
Have you
If
checked to
anybody,
see whether it's is it aluminum or is it iron?
no, I checked the alloy. It is aluminum, and as we took the cylinders off, we checked out all the pistons. The pistons are absolutely perfect, no scores, nothing. I looked inside the motor as you did, and we could not see a speck of metal inside the motor. And we also took the governor screen off, and I was told that if it gets to the governor screen, that's evidence that it's been through the motor, but the governor screen was spotless. So we put it all together, and actually within the next couple of days, I'm going to pull it out of the hangar, and we're going to fire it up. And I called Lycoming, and they suggested that what I did was probably the problem, but they would suggest run it for 10 hours. And then after 10 hours, take the oil filter out and cut it open and see if it stopped. So that's what I've only flown like 12 hours this year. It's terrible. All I've been doing is working. But anyway, hopefully everything's good, because I want to do some flying. So, but I love the plane. I'm just trying to figure out if it loves me. So anyway.
Welcome. And thanks for being here with us, Raymond.
Oh, no, it's great. I'm listening to everyone. It's great. It's a lot of knowledge out there. And the fact that, if we can share, our problems or good times with it, I think that's what it's all about.
Well said.
Just an interesting note for the last gentleman. This is Alan Cheek down in Atlanta, Georgia. But on my old engine, when I first bought my airplane back in 1991, within probably the first year, anyways, I had learned to finally, do oil changes myself, and then take a filter off and bring it on home. And I was getting down to a point where I was burning about a quart every 4 hours when I first got the airplane, but I was getting down to a quart every 2 hours. So I finally ended up one fall afternoon doing an oil change, took the filter home, drained it all out, cut open the filter, and I had enough aluminum in the filter that I could scrape out and cover the palm of my hand.
Wow,
So
that's a lot.
I'm not a mechanic, but I know that ain't right. So I go down there to my mechanic, and he goes, let me have the airplane for a couple of days and I'll get back with you. And I don't know why I said this, but I said something like, well, I think it's cylinder number, 2, 1, and 3 or something like that. Anyway, so finally he calls me a few days later and says, well, it's not cylinder 1 or 3. And I go, oh, okay. So now what do we do? And he goes, well, we have to pull them all because we don't have a clue what's going on. I said, oh, can I come down and help? I'll be your little butt boy. And he goes, yeah, come on down. So we finally get to the last cylinder. We're pulling the barrel off. And as we're pulling the barrel off, I can hear chunks of rings falling on the floor. And I'm picking them up, and I go, oh, here's my problem. And he gets the barrel off, and he goes, no, here's your problem. And exactly kind of what you just described, those plugs on a Lycoming engine, they're called piston plugs. They look to me like bottle caps, but anyways, one of them had disintegrated almost completely. So the fact that you didn't have all your piston plugs are intact, that's great. Anyways, so I ended up doing a top overhaul fluid. The engine had to change a cylinder here and there on that lifetime. But 2 years ago, I finally put a new engine in my airplane, factory reman, and put a brand new oil cooler in it from Pacific Oil Coolers out in California. And probably within a year, anyways, I noticed I'm going out there one day to fly. Actually, it was the flight just before I'm getting ready to turn the airplane in for an annual. And I noticed there's oil in the front of the tire. And I'm like, now how is oil getting to the front of the tire? Dripping from there. Anyways, so I go flying to get the airplane all, engine oil all warmed up, land, taxi to my maintenance center. and I told the lead mechanic, I go, yeah, by the way, I get this oil leak or something's, up in the front. So I just live like literally my hangar is 50 yards or 100 yards from aircraft spruce. So I said, well, I'm going to run over and grab a case of oil and a filter and an air filter. And, I'll bring that right back for you. And he goes, okay, great. And I get back and he goes, here's your problem. So a brand spanking new oil cooler was disintegrating from inside. And that's what was calling it. So, good call on changing the oil filter. The oil cooler. Again,
Right.
Just because you change it and it's brand new doesn't mean something can't happen.
Oh, I know that.
Had we not caught that, that thing probably would have disintegrated. I would have trashed out a brand new 50-hour engine. That would have been a bad day.
Well, I only have 300 hours on this motor engine, and so and I know I'm very mechanically inclined. I'm a landscape architect by trade, and I've got excavators, backhoes, skid steers, Mack trucks. I've got all that. So I've always had to do all the repairs because when I started off, I didn't have two nickels to rub together.
Right.
So doing that, you learn how to do a lot of it, and nuts and bolts are nuts and bolts. If it's an aircraft engine or anything, they all really work the same. It's just that you have to be an IA to work on them to be signed off, and I understand that. But I have a very good friend who is, and he's an excellent mechanic. And when we knew we had this problem, he thought nothing about, saying, if you got the time, come on in, let's rip it apart. And I literally did everything. And when it came time to just take the cylinders off, we took them one at a time, and then actually ended up having to borrow some tools from a gentleman, Jerry in Danielson. Jerry Sutka, I forgot his name. He runs the shop there. He really helped me out. But anyway, so we did that, and it's the wrist pins and the caps, like you were saying. And usually, if you don't catch it in time, it literally, because what happens is the wrist pin will get hung up. And I don't know why, but they use Lycoming uses a floating system, which keeps the caps floating side to side, and it's actually less wear and tear. But if it does get hung, if the wrist pin does get hung up, it'll put pressure on one side of the wrist pin, which will put pressure on that cap, and that cap it'll shear itself like fine, like 1,000 shavings. It almost looks like little chocolate shavings. And if you don't catch it in time, if all the entire aluminum cap was to be eliminated, completely dissipated, then what happens is the wrist pin hits the wall and you can have a lockup. And the motor anyway. So I've been monitoring the aluminum for a while, and it got to a point of we've done enough monitoring. So, and it's just ironic to find out that the person that did the last one, and the motor was done at Matatuck, and they did not change it wasn't Matatuck did the motor, but the mechanic never changed my oil cooler. And so I took a liberty to cutting the oil cooler in half. And I tried to because it has all these little orifices, which is where the oil passes through for cooling purposes. And I wasn't able to pass a piece of wire through any of them. And so I think it was loaded with old aluminum chips from the previous motors.
Can I make a suggestion?
Quick
Make a
question.
suggestion. That would be to maybe I have those aluminum chips analyzed by like Blackstone or something like that. You never know. It could be aluminum material from the bearings. I've had that happen to me. When I bought the airplane, I first got it. It started making metal. So we had the aluminum analyzed, and it turned out to be bearing material. We wound up having to have the engine overhauled because a bearing got spun.
Right.
It's aluminum, just like just like the piston pin plugs are, but a different composition. So you might want to get that checked out.
Yeah, Rick is right. If that engine was overhauled prior to 2002, and they put Lycoming used to have bearings that were aluminum and tin alloy for the on the crankshafts. And if that engine, and they would fatigue out quicker than the more modern ones that I think was started in 2002, 2003. I don't remember exactly when. He's right. You might want to get that material looked at. If it's an aluminum tin alloy, it might be a crankshaft bearing.
I agree 100%.
Yeah. In my case, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm actually going to have the oil in. I'm going to send it to there's a company. I apologize. I forgot the name. But the key with the bearing is you'll notice it if you have a loss of oil pressure. And I never had.
I don't agree with that at all. I flew the airplane home all the way from Florida, thinking everything was just fine. And when I had was having a Tannis heater installed, and that's when they found that it was full of metal. Now, what happened was, in my case, when I bought the airplane, it had just 300 hours on an overhaul. And unfortunately, when the mechanic did the overhaul, there was a change in the bearings. There's a little pin in the main bearing cap that stops the bearing from spinning. Well, Lycoming made a revision. They changed it to a larger diameter pin. And consequently, the bearing had a larger diameter hole to correspond with the pin. But when the mechanic did it, he put the newer style bearing with the older style pin, which allowed the bearing to rock back and forth and ultimately spin around, and it caused some damage. Matter of fact, if we didn't catch it when we did, we would have had to replace the crankshaft. And a crankshaft on an IO 720 is like $30,000.
What is the cost on
So
the
you might want to get checked out.
I'm going to have to go black hat here. I'm going to mute everybody again and try and get things started a little bit. Quickly, I'm going to show you the thing about the wings for those of you that are trying to do the wings. If you have not registered, then you'll have to do this part. Go to the ComancheZOOM Comanche webpage, get the ComancheZOOM page, registration link. We'll get you into that. Put your name, phone number, email address. There's an option also for your hometown, and click on check the wing box and send it. I will get that thing, so I will have your registration. Once you have done that, you need to rename yourself here on Zoom so that the name in your file in your registration matches the Zoom. That way Robert can find out who you were. And with that, I think we're just about ready to go to our program. So CJ, you want to take that over?
Sure. Thanks, Pete. Yep. And what Pete's particularly referring to, and Robert, is a lot of you are coming in named as iPad or iPhone. If you could put in your proper name, then Robert will be able to work with the FAA to get you wings credit. And that can help with reductions in your insurance rates, and it can help with actually getting a BFR more quickly and cheaply through a program that the FAA Wings has started to offer that allows you to get your biennial flight review done without actually, I think it's like an hour of actual with your instructor and then completing some wings courses. This can be part of that that program. In any case, just a couple of quick changes. I want to recognize somebody who was not mentioned as much in the initial invite. So we have here with us Kristin Winter, who is well known as the forum moderator and owner of the Delphi Airworthy Comanche Forum, where a lot of the heavy hitter technical people, such as some of the folks weighing in on the filter, hang out. And then and Kristin's an ANPIA and CFII MEI, who ran a Part 135 operation out of Sitka, Alaska, and was a freight dog where they fly in all kinds of things that most of us would never think of, and who was one of the facilitators for Winter Flying 1. Ron Keil, although Mike Kalinia's, was it 8,000 or 9,000 hours, Mike? Was really extraordinary. Ron's got about 5,000 flying out of northern Michigan in a stock 250. And Ron, I think, is one of the record holders for like longest nonstop flights in a stock Comanche without fuel tanks.
Well,
having
Mike
gone.
Kalini, I have over 9,000 hours, but remember, I'm really old.
You know, if you got that way, Mike, we want to hear from you, because obviously there's a lot to be said for getting old while you're flying and not dying. So we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, but Ron flies out of northern Michigan, and the Great Lakes are just notorious for winter weather. About 5,000 hours, 10 and a half hours nonstop in a stock 250. And also has presented to us on long distance flying and use of preflight for flight planning. So super happy to have Ron here. He supplied a bunch of icing photos that Pete's got in a prezo that we'll be able to use. George Richmond is here, and George worked with Zach Grant extensively at doing a lot of training of Comanche pilots in a really successful program that accompanied or happened at the same time as a dramatic decrease in pilot error accidents. So sorry to take the time, but I wanted to let you know some of the folks who are here to kind of facilitate this. George also flies out in Omaha, Nebraska area. One of the things that came up when we were reviewing NTSB reports on Comanches and icing was not just airframe icing, but carb ice and induction icing, and then proper use of carb heat came up as something in the accident reports where we clearly didn't always know or remember how to use carb heat. So with that, I'm going to ask Pete. So I just wanted to introduce, and then Zach Grant just texted me. He's been sending useful information all day, but he had warned me that some stuff had come up on Thursday, and he just texted and he's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it in tonight, but he's sending his best wishes. He's glad we're all here, and he sent links to an FAA advisory circular on icing canceling the FAA's guidance on flight and icing conditions, along with the definitions that we need. Because just a quick note, there's icing, there's conditions conducive to icing, and then there's flight into known icing. And when we get our briefings, which we really need to get and understand up front in winter flying. And Mike Ellis just posted a link to a Mike Bush article from Savvy Aviation into the chat window, which will be helpful to look at. But when we get our winter briefings and we see icing conditions, the possibility of icing, that is not flight into known icing, and tonight is about getting the tools. When we listened in Winter Flying 1, what became clear is that people like Mike, Kristin, Zach, Ron, and I've spoken with George at length today, they think about winter flying in this interesting way. And what became clear is that all of them do their pre-flight briefings and then their in-flight updates, and they have a map in their head of where the temperatures are, where they're going to be, where conditions conducive to icing may be, and they know whether they're going to go up or down or around if they run into something they don't like. And they're also aware of the different types of icing and what it's going to do. So that knowledge is what we are here to listen to, and the Canadians, I suspect, have it as well. So with that, Pete, are you able to bring up the slide deck with some of the stuff that Ron ran into recently on a flight where in 12 minutes he picked up quite a bit of moderate mixed rime icing, and just start off with that. And then I've asked George to weigh in particularly on proper use of carb heat, and we'll just dive in. And I suspect this conversation is going to take care of itself.
Yeah, I think I would recommend that everybody go to the speaker view up there in the choice of what you see on your screen. That may help, because then you'll see the speaker, that's whoever's talking. And here is the PowerPoint that I put together at the last minute of icing stuff. Take it away.
Ron, Keil, this puts you a little bit on the hot seat.
Okay, I think these are the pictures that Zach sent.
That's correct.
This looks like his plane. I think at the last Zoom meeting on icing, Zach went up for a flight a few hours before the meeting and to show us what the icing looked like on his plane. And this looks like mostly rime, but a little mixed. And you can see it. You can see it on his temperature. thermometer stick that sticks out of his windshield there. You can see probably, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch or so, maybe a quarter. And that probably matches what's on his wing. He also has a indicator, a plastic indicator by his nav light that at night shows you if the nav light's on or not. And that's another good indication. Any sharp edge is a good indication because the rime likes to collect there. And that looks like rime and a little mix coming back over the top of the wing.
These are all 6 of these were from Zach for his little flight before the last icing thing.
Right.
Looks like more like clear to mixed to me, but
The one on the left looks clearer, but the one on the right definitely is mixed.
Yep.
This is a newer one.
Yeah, this was a 12-minute flight from Lapeer, Michigan to Pontiac, Michigan, in moderate ice. And you can see on the nav light and on the nav light indicator, I think the reason it's stuck more on the around the landing light is because I had the landing light on. It was just a hair under 300 feet coming into Pontiac. So I had the light on so the tower could see me when I broke out. And that ice, the forecast was icing between 3,000 and 6,000. So I filed for 3. And on my climb out between 2 and 3, that's where I got most of that. So I immediately requested 4, went up to 4 and quit picking up any, didn't lose any, but I didn't pick up any more. And then I got a little bit on the landing.
Not sure what this one was, but it was one of the ones that came in.
How much ice can the Comanche take without really affecting her?
Funny you should ask.
depends very much on.
Any ice affects it. I mean, I can just have a trace and I start losing airspeed and of course ground speed.
The interesting part about that is that the worst icing you can get is on your stabilator. That thing gets iced up and starts vibrating, you got problems, big problems.
Yeah, and Pete, if you go back to, I think one of the early pictures of mine shows the stabilator. I don't know if you can, no, keep going forward, there. Back up one. Can you zoom it in any around, that's Betty.
Not, no.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what I did now.
Picture number 2 is the stabilator. Picture number 2, left-hand one.
Yep.
Yeah, if I guess you can't see mine very well because there's somebody in front of it, but.
Let me go back and reshare this.
Okay.
Oh, shoot. There we go. That's your
Okay,
stabilator right here.
Yeah, that's Zach's. I had a little bit more than that on mine. I do have the counterweights on the end of the stabilator. I've never had any flutter. But yeah, I respect that comment that definitely that that stabilator is working hard when you get ice on the
Yeah.
plane, that's for sure.
On a PA 30, when that starts to flutter, you are in deep end inning. And if someone wants me to tell a story, I'll tell a harrowing story about flying into a situation over Bakersfield, and my airspeed went from 155 indicated to 95 in about 2 minutes.
Yep. So, Mike, you actually just introduced the flight aware part of Pete's screen. And Pete, if you want to bring that back up.
Will do.
What that is Ron had, oh, there it is. So speaking of rapid changes in airspeed, and this is in the good direction. And then I want to just ask Kristin and George to weigh in on some of what they're seeing. But Ron, that was when you were gaining airspeed again after getting up.
Yeah, this ice that you see on the one picture I picked up going into Pontiac, climbing out of Pontiac, I didn't pick up near as much because we climbed through pretty quick. We were on top at 8. We had filed for 11, so we went on up to 11. And the picture, you didn't know what it was. That was actually just showing us on top of the clouds in the sunshine at 11,000. I was seeing in the 130s for a while, and then it gradually picked up and finally ended up around 171, 172 knots with a little tailwind. But so I was looking at probably 20, 25 knot reduction because of the ice on the plane.
Yeah. So Kristin was about to weigh in on something a few minutes ago, and I'd like to invite her to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, pretty much forgot what the comment was.
Yep. So one thing, Pete, can you zoom in on the wing shot there? Because one thing that Kristin and George and Ron all spoke about was the shape that ice takes. And you're going to want to go to the one that's a full wing shot because it's more visible inboard on the wing. Yep, if you zoom in on that.
How's that?
You can see that the ice has curled forward. It plasters itself across the leading edge of the wing. And then it's got a horn pointing forward at the top.
Not quite. I mean, what you're seeing here is mixed ice, tending towards clear. And what you're getting is some of the droplets are probably a little bit larger and they're not freezing right away. So they're running back, and they're freezing a couple of milliseconds later and forming this little ridge. This little ridge across the top here and across the bottom. And that's a situation that if continues, basically you're making a spoiler on your wing. This is a particularly pernicious sort of ice, just because of, building this wing, building this ridge right past the leading edge of the wing, is of course doing all sorts of terrible things to your laminar flow, like killing it.
Yep. So when you see this, all of you, what are your thoughts? What are your actions?
Well, it really depends. It really depends on what the temperatures are. If there's no warm air below, I want to get it cold. I want to get up and get it colder, because if I get it colder, maybe I can get it more towards rime ice that tends to freeze just on the leading edge of the wing, and doesn't do the run back and freeze. Run back and freeze is by far the most annoying.
Yeah, and that's why I had filed for a higher altitude, taking off towards the east. Here I was kind of stuck. Most of that flight was setting up for the approach and flying the ILS into Pontiac. So I was able to go to 4,000 for a little bit, but then I had to come back down into it. I definitely would not have wanted to be there for a half hour to 45 minutes.
Or 10.
Now, the other thing that happens in my plane, and I think I don't know what year, and Zach would probably, maybe somebody else here knows, but I've got the old fuel tank vents. There was a service bulletin, and mine had complied with it, but there's still the little tubes that the vent is a tube that sticks out and curls towards the front of the plane. When I'm flying along, I've seen tennis ball size ice balls around those vents. And the only way to keep them open is to continually switch tanks every 15 minutes. Because if I run on, like one flight, I only ran on my 2 outboard tanks, my auxiliary tanks, and the 2 inboard tanks were completely covered. You couldn't have got any fuel. If you tried to get fuel out of them, you'd just collapse the tank. So you can get fuel, it just pulls the tanks out of the hangars and collapse the tank. So the only thing I've found to fix it, number one, probably to change to the newer style NACA vent, which there is a kit for that, I guess. The other is to switch tanks often enough that the vent air actually makes a little hole in the ice and keeps it clear. And Kristin, I don't know if you have any experience with that or any comments?
Yeah, that Piper made that changeover, I think, right around the time that they came out with the 260. And then later, there was a couple of service bulletins before that. But, unless you've got the, recessed wing vents, you have the potential in ice of freezing up your vent, which then will basically cause the engine to suck the bladder in and wad it up in the corner of the bay. And that's what the FAA was addressing with AD 68 1303, I think it was, that requires every 100 hours to check to make sure that your fuel tanks haven't collapsed inside. Yeah, in the ice, that's a definite issue. Frequently, switching tanks can help, because even if there's a little bit of porousness in the ice, it might relax. But if you put a whole pile of ice on that vent, and you land and you find that there's a whole bunch of ice on those vents, you'd be well advised to check out to make sure that your fuel tanks haven't collapsed, those bladders inside. Unfortunately, that kit's not available anymore. It wouldn't be too hard I was trying to get a hold of an exemplar because it looks like it wouldn't be too difficult to own or produce those proper vents. And they're kind of a lot of work to install because you got to pull the bladder out of it. But if it was readily available, you know, as people swap tanks out, it would be a good thing to install.
And George, based on what you've been seeing on those rather cool photos, one of the things that keeps coming up for everybody is the use of modern pre-flight briefing tools so that you kind of know what you're getting into and you can create that map in your head. What do you all use before you go to figure out what you're getting into?
Well, there's a number of new, relatively new weather tools that we now have at our disposal with it. You know, we didn't have when we were learning to fly. And so I was kind of looking, I'd look at those, you know, one of them that's very handy is on ForeFlight. If you go into imagery and you scroll down the list there, it's on the left-hand side, you'll find a whole bunch of icing information. And that's a good place to start. You know, it tells you, well, let's see. Tells you about icing probabilities and severity, lowest freezing level, things like that. So that's not a bad place to start. The other thing that I'm looking for is surface temperatures along my route and what they may be forecast to be. Because like Kristin said, I want to land with a clean airplane. You know, once we get ice on the wing, we're now test pilots. No one's ever tested that configuration before except us. And we have no idea what the stall speed is or how the airplane's going to handle when we change flap settings or anything else. So I would like to have the airplane nice and clean within 1,000 feet of the ground, if at all possible. But back to tools, you know, like I say, aviationweather.gov is a great place to start. They go to type in aviationweather.gov / /icing, and you'll find a lot of icing information. There's another fairly new tool. How many people are familiar with a thing called SKU-T?
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Okay. Well,
my second favorite tool. There's a great iPad app for that.
Yeah, it's called SKU-T Pro, Log Pro.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, I don't know how
use
it
it
works.
a lot in hang gliders and in tailplanes.
How does it relate to sailplanes?
It does, because it
use
shows
it a
lift.
lot because it shows a lot of information for sailplanes and lift and thermals and winds and skew point. So we use it flying sailplanes.
Oh, okay. Very good. I have not used it much. I'm still trying to learn how to use it and read it, but I haven't heard anybody say anything bad about it. And one of the things relative to tonight's discussion, it does show, apparently, a very clear picture of icing probability and where the icing levels are, what the severity might be, whether you're looking at icing or freezing rain or freezing drizzle. And there's a whole host of training material out there for learning how to use it, how to read it. But I think that's one of the better tools we have for deciding whether or not to go and what the icing potential is along our route. There's a gentleman named Scott Dienstadt that runs a website called avwexworkshops.com. And it's a subscription site, but he does a lot of explaining how SKU-T is read and what can be gleaned from it. So yeah, there's some really good resources out there now.
Hello, George.
Mike Kalani here. I'm going to make a comment. It's probably, I don't know if it'll be a popular comment or not, but I will tell you all these tools are wonderful. And I've been around a long time, 52 years flying. Here's my rule. And I broke it once and I was so sorry. If I'm flying, I don't care what I got as forecasts and whatever, because, you know, great. It lets me plan a little bit. My rule is visible moisture, OAT is below freezing. I don't go into it. That's my rule. And I turn around and I go home, and that'll save your butt every time.
Yep, you can't argue with that.
You know, Zach sent an interesting definition that I'm going to throw in here, because what George has brought up is actually exactly what one of these so-called black hat guys at the FAA asked me to bring in, which is, please learn how, he's like, I don't like violating people. Please learn how to get weather briefings. They've gotten a lot better and it will really help. So Zach, there's a discussion about known icing and about forecast icing. And I'm just going to read it. And we did a bunch of looking at Boeing's definitions and the FAA's definitions. The FAA actually canceled out 2 advisory circulars that and basically said in a way, it's like, well, these advisory circulars on flight and icing conditions are canceled. So forecast icing is when there are conditions conducive to ice accumulation. So that's forecast, when the conditions are conducive. Known icing is when you look out and you see ice on your wings, because now you know you're in icing conditions. And icing conditions, i.e. the conditions conducive to ice, are defined by most manufacturers as temperatures between +10 and -40 degrees centigrade in visible moisture, or when there's less than a quarter-mile visibility. I'm going to say it again. And by the way, -40 centigrade or Celsius turns out to be exactly -40 Fahrenheit. It's defined by most manufacturers as temperature between +10 and -40 C in visible moisture, or when less than quarter-mile visibility. And Boeing says 1 mile visibility. So at that point, I'm going to shut up and just say that's conditions conducive to icing.
That must have been written by lawyers that didn't know anything about flying. I have never seen any ice at +10 centigrade.
CJ, it's Ray, if I can jump in.
Yep.
On that one.
Maybe they mean carburetor ice.
Well, Venturi icing was what Zach mentioned.
You can get that at +10.
Oh, you can get that much higher than that.
You can get much higher than that. Yeah.
I can say that sorry, this is Ray. At the airline, those temperatures are what we use for our anti-ice. And I can tell you, I have seen rime ice forming on my airliner at +5. I've seen it. It's not uncommon.
Were you descending though out of 40,000 feet and the wing was still super cold?
Well, but that wouldn't explain my windshield wipers. And normally, but I'm just saying in the climb, I can't see what the wing's doing in my plane, in my airliner. I'm just mentioning that I have seen icing forming above 0. It can happen. I've witnessed it. But the point I wanted to bring up was that the FAA, it used to be that if the condition, the old AC that they've canceled basically said if the conditions were conducive to icing, that constituted flight into known icing. And they could violate you. And they stepped back from that and said, okay, just because it's conducive to icing doesn't mean there will be icing. They haven't figured out why it will and why it won't form at certain temperatures. But one of the things I wanted to add was if there are PIREPs of icing in an area that you fly into, you have now flown into known icing. It's not just once you start getting it. If there are PIREPs that over the Dayton airport, icing is reported at 3,000 feet, and you come flying into Dayton and pick up icing at 3,000 feet, the FAA will consider that you have just flown into known icing. So part of your pre-flight should be not just the conditions, but if there are current reports of icing, that bridges that gap from conducive and puts you into known icing, and watch out for that. I just wanted to mention that little piece of that.
You know, and with respect to the comment about carb ice, if anybody has, you know, a carb temperature probe on their airplane, I've noted it's very interesting. I'm flying in California. I can be 15 miles inland where the air is pretty dry and the temperature, fly from there to the coast, temperature difference is very minimal, couple degrees. But if you watch the carb temp, the minute there's some moisture in there, that carb temp, I've seen it drop from 55 to 38 on a very warm day. It's amazing how quickly you can get, how quickly in the Ventura you can get cold. I guess that's why those Cessnas have such an icing problem. But I've observed that more and more times, in days in a million years, I never think I was close to having conditions for carb icing, and the temperature was sitting there at 34 degrees.
Mm-hmm. So, and that was Mark Sullivan speaking. If you jump in, just name yourself. So that was helpful. The carb ice issue came up again and again in reviewing Comanche accident statistics. And so first, what Ray just added in is parallel to the advisory circular that Zach just sent. And I'm going to read it because it's so helpful. It's a little bit of like a black art, like, well, what is known icing and what is conditions conducive to icing? And Ray's right. When you get a PIREP from a freight dog that they're flying in icing and then you go fly right behind them, it's hard to say that you didn't know what you were doing. It's a short advisory circular. It was issued 10/8/2015. It's in case you all want to see for yourself, it's AC number 91-74B, and all it says is Pilot's Guide, Flight in Icing Conditions. This advisory circular contains updated and additional information for the pilots of airplanes under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Parts 91, 121, 125, and 135. The purpose of this AC is to provide pilots with a convenient reference guide on the principal factors related to flight and icing conditions and the location of additional information in related publications. As a result of these updates and consolidating of information, AC 91-74A, Pilot Guide, Flight and Icing Conditions, dated December 31st, 2007. Don't fall asleep, folks, because this ends really soon and it's got kind of a killer cliffhanger ending. And AC 91-51A, Effective Icing on Aircraft Control and Airplane De-ice and Anti-ice Systems, dated July 19th, 1996, are canceled. This advisory circular does not authorize deviations from established company procedures or regulatory requirements. Signed, John Barbagallo, Deputy Director, Flight Standard Service.
Hi, this is Will Carpenter. I have a question for Kristin Winters. One issue that I've seen myself in a few times, not yet in the Comanche, is you're starting off somewhere where there's an overcast layer above you, and say it's at like, I don't know, anywhere between 1,500 and 3,000 feet. So, and you're not really thinking about doing an instrument approach into that airport. I mean, it's possible if you have some sort of emergency, but you're primarily looking at just getting out of that airport, and you know that the cloud deck is like 500 feet, 1,000 feet. I guess my question is, how much risk do you think a pilot's assuming with a Comanche that's capable of, on a winter day, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 feet per minute, like punching through a layer? How much risk are you assuming, based on a 500-foot layer, 1,000-foot layer, especially when you know that your destination is somewhere where the weather is above freezing, and that anything you have, you'll either shed on your final approach or you'll, lose somewhere along the way. And I guess, to give you examples, I have family, I grew up in Connecticut, I have family that lives there. And so I'm just, hypothetical would be, I'm flying out of Connecticut and now I live down in Georgia and I'm flying to Georgia. I mean, how much risk am I assuming punching through that way or spending a very short period of time? I think that's a question I have and that a lot of other pilots would have as well.
Nobody's talking.
Hey, I'll take it on.
Well, so will I. I will tell you that, I did most of my flying in Comanches in a PA-30, but it doesn't matter. One day I was flying up to San Francisco, summertime, who cares? It was wonderful. And I told you I have a rule, and it's if the moisture, I can see visible moisture, a cloud or whatever, and it's below freezing, I don't go into it. Well, I could see through the cloud. And so I said, well, I'm over Bakersfield. What's that going to do? I went into this, it wasn't even a real cloud. I could see through it. And within 30 seconds, I heard bang, 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 bang. I remember, twin Comanche. I'm punching holes in the side of my airplane. So I guess my whole point is that it doesn't take very long to get into a lot of trouble. And that only cost me $5,000 to fix, but that's why I had the rule and I broke it. I haven't broken it since. That was about 1998.
I could give an alternative position. I think your rule is great in that everybody needs to have a rule. Don't let yourself talk yourself into something because you want to get somewhere. A good friend of mine that's an airline pilot and a Comanche owner gave a little seminar one time, and his approach is sit down on a nice warm evening with a book when nothing's pressing you and make yourself some rules. My rule is I won't go through more than 3,000 feet. I've got to have 1,000 feet below it. And I've got to have reports, real data that says there is a top and the icing conditions within it. And I have to have a clearance to go to that. You can call flight, you can call a departure when you're getting ready to go and say, I need a direct a clearance to 5,000 or 6,000 or whatever. I can't take an intermediate, and believe it or not, they'll call ahead and they'll get you that that clearance. But that's my rule. Your rule needs to be for you.
Well, I don't disagree with your rule. As a matter of fact, it was the ATC guy who recognized what was going on in my worst case situation and said, what can I do for you? And I said, get me out of this. And he gave me a vector to turn me around and get me out of it. Unfortunately, he vectored me into a hailstorm, but that's another story. All I can say is you really got to be careful. Comanche's a great airplane, and laminar flow wings and the stabilator, it picks up I'm talking about the PA-30. I'm expecting that the single engine is exactly the same way. I don't have a lot of time in the single engine, but you just got to be ready for it. And why take a chance? That's all I can say. That's what I preach in when I deal with people on the fast team. Why take a chance? 3,000 feet sounds okay. But like I said, in 30 seconds, I was in trouble. So anyway, I've spoke my piece. And that's the only reason I came on. I wanted to share my experience and say that you just got to be careful with ice. And the Comanche is, I've been in, I had a 210. I had a bunch of general aviation airplanes that were really nice. The Comanche is serious in ice. You got to be careful. That's all and I'm done.
This is Ron Ward. I just wanted to, we were talking about, whether 3,000 feet's a good cloud deck to go through. I had an experience 2 days ago, not in a Comanche, but it was in a Navajo with the ice on it. And coming out of Batavia, New York, the lee of Lake Erie, the worst places in the world to get icing. They said the tops were at 5,000, which is about a 3,000 foot layer. I got into it and picking up ice right away, about 1,500 feet. By the time I got to 5,000, I was still in it. And I came out of it at 5,800 with an inch of ice on the airplane, on the non-protected surfaces. I was in it for 7 minutes and I picked up an inch of ice. I would not have wanted to have been in a Comanche at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Going through layers with icing.
So that's actually a helpful input. This is CJ. So given the group we have, and Ron is another twin driver, he's actually the assistant chief for the Northeast and has helped keep this all going through this period. So Ron, I'm really glad you weighed in, and I hadn't known about that. In the event, so obviously the forecast didn't quite match the reality. And starting probably with Kristin because of this sort of interesting variety of experience, and then going to George and then to Ron Keil. If you were in a Comanche, given the forecast, what is the decision-making process that you go through when you get there and you're like, okay, this isn't quite what they were telling me about, and you're looking out at your wings and you're seeing what kind of stuff you're accumulating? What's your decision-making process at that point?
Well, I knew the top.
Plan B.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, actually, go ahead. Yeah.
If you're going to depart and climb into a layer, expecting to get on top, you better have a plan B already, in mind. What's going to be your bingo point that you're going to request a return to the airport and shoot an approach? And is that a viable option, under those conditions? And if you haven't got the plan B before you decide to stick your nose in it in the first place, put the plane back in the hangar. If you can't come up with a rational plan B. And, one of the best plan Bs for punching through a layer is to have enough clear air underneath, without obstacles, so that, if you have to, you can zoom back down and get underneath into clear air again.
Good point. Tom Voitko in Burbank. I've been flying Comanches for a long time. I've been in all the conditions you're talking about. 90% of us Comanche guys are not airline pilots and professional pilots. We're real guys that like to fly. So a good rule, never enter a frozen cloud or a cloud that's below temperature unless you've got clear obstacles, like the terrain below is clear that you can get down to and get out of. The idea of climbing to a colder temperature, sometimes it works. I've had a time of going to Reno and going over Yosemite, and up there we got ice at 10,000 feet and got up to 15,000, and it was like sleet, but it didn't stick to the wing. But I never did that again. So make sure when you get in the cloud, if you're not really an airline pilot with a lot of proficiency, give yourself clearance underneath.
Good point.
Well, I am an airline pilot and I won't take a Comanche anywhere near it unless I have a lot of underneath.
Another good point.
We don't have equipment on it. Once we pick it up, unless we find warm air, we have no way to shed it.
Who do you fly for, Ray?
What's that?
Who do you fly for?
PSA. Fly
Oh,
Sierra
awesome.
Dave. But yeah, I will tell you the truth. I fly in icing at work all the time. And when I'm in my airplane, I'm scared to death of it. I don't want to go anywhere near it. I've found
would
myself
say
in situations where I
There's
didn't.
always bourbon
What's
on the
that?
ground.
There's always bourbon on the ground. I like it. You flew for PSA?
Yes.
Tom
I'm actually-
Friedkin was a very good friend of mine.
The only reason I'm available is because I am sitting on my thumb in a hotel in Dayton, Ohio on reserve. And they didn't call
Living
me.
the dream.
So, hey, somebody else is paying for the hotel room, so I'm doing okay.
Right. And Ron
I
Ward,
I got a question for the group, and I retired airline guy. So I'll ask the question of, because I'm down here in Georgia, we don't get a whole lot of snow. So I just remember during my flight training, primary or whatever, but you know, somebody was talking about whatever, flying through snow. So I'm not talking about ice or anything like that, actual just snow. And of course the comment was, well, you can fly through snow only because it's already frozen. It's not going to stick to the airplane. So again, asking from the Georgia boy, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I have a thought on that.
Thanks, Pete. Or sorry.
I got a thought on that. It depends on the type of snow. I live in northwestern Illinois, not near the Great Lakes. But if it's really cold and the snow is dry, I'll fly through it. But if you're on that, 30, it's wet, then it turns to water.
Right.
So once again, like everything else, it's dependent, at least in this area. I think if you were way up north in Minnesota, you'd be fine, where it gets cold and stays cold, I think.
We call that miserable.
The Eskimos have 57
I can
words
weigh
for
in
snow.
on.
I'm going to jump in. People were talking about the gentleman from Bakersfield, running into ice and getting a $5,000 paint job. I had the same experience, but with the most harmless of creatures, virga. You're over the desert, and this little whispery virga. It was the middle of summertime. Flew through the virga, a little splattering on the windshield, no big deal. Landed in Needles, California, hotter than hell, and discovered all my VGs were gone, and the leading edge of my wing had been sanded because the virga this was August, mind you, over northern Arizona. That virga was actually ice crystals. And you didn't even know you were flying through the crystals of ice, but just like sandpaper. Had to repaint the whole airplane, basically. Did a number on it. Didn't dent it like ice off a prop. That was the other thing that was funny, because you didn't know was that you were in ice. But I see virga now, and I steer clear of it. And you used to think of it as being almost essentially harmless. It isn't, even in the summertime.
I can make a comment about the snow question. I was actually I was in a 172, a rented 172. I was on my way back to Virginia from Connecticut, and this touches on ice too, because I had seen what the forecast was, and I thought I had about, I could make my trip at about 4,000 feet, going west, and I was on an IFR flight plan, and then I actually, I got some approval from ATC to fly at 3 because the clouds were, I was pretty much scud running, which wasn't a very great feeling. But I was, looking at the wing struts, monitoring if I was picking up any ice, checking the wheels, pretty much the whole trip. It was pretty bumpy. It's a pretty terrible flight. But as I'm approaching Lancaster, which was a fuel stop for me, I, was lining up for the, I think it was like an ILS into Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And, I'm focusing on what I'm doing, and I hear the Lancaster Tower telling some Cirrus that's on the other side of the airport to not, basically turn around because there's snow coming over the airport. And I looked up, and it was like out of a movie. It was a wall of snow moving across the airport, and I had been slowing down to my approach speed, and immediately pushed the throttle all the way forward because I was like, I can't see anything past that. And then as soon as I got on the ground, it was snowing on top of me, and the visibility went from probably 10 miles to less than a mile in a matter of minutes. So I guess my 2 cents on snow is if you catch a snow squall near an airport, that is not a good experience and not something you want to be in. So I would recommend trying to avoid snow. And I have another, my sister-in-law is a Chinook pilot for the Army, and she said that she's had to put her Chinook down in a field in Pennsylvania because of the loss of visibility because of a snow squall. They just come out of nowhere. They're not in the forecasts. Yeah, something definitely to be careful with.
To the gentleman that was just talking about Virga, I guess, not to one up you, but 2 stories, I guess. One, back early, again, I was a 727 co-pilot with FedEx, and I was flying from Memphis down to Houston to go visit my parents. And so it's a nice day, nothing crazy or anything. But anyway, there was this little cloud, and there's some Virga coming out of that. And kind of like a ding dong, I thought, I'll just fly through that because I can get a free airplane wash, And let me tell you what, dropped about 1,500 feet from. I mean, it's like a giant hand just pushing you down. So it was kind of like, again, when you're flying transport jets, you kind of like, yeah, that doesn't mean anything. It's a totally different animal to when you're flying a Comanche. So if you see Virga, stay out of it. That's a downdraft is what that is. The second point, talk about thunderstorms, a little off script, but at FedEx, I think we used to have a rule of something like if you're above flight level 200 or something, then we had to stay like 20 miles away from a thunderstorm or something like that, and below flight level 200, which we are, then I can't remember, maybe it was 15 or 10 miles, something like that. But again, another trip, I'm flying along and my wife and I were doing a trip from Georgia all the way out to I think we were going out somewhere out to the West Coast. Anyways, but we're over West Texas and there are thunderstorms all over, and the big ones. And so again, my wife is looking at me and she's going, we're not going to fly through that. And I'm like, honey, we wouldn't even fly through that in an MD-11 or a triple. But you get a doctor in a Bonanza and he'll head right for it. But anyways, all of a sudden, we noticed. So again, we're probably 30 miles or 25 miles, 30 miles away from this humongous thunderstorm. And all of a sudden we started getting ice pellets coming through the vents. And my wife's going, what is this? And it's off that thunderstorm over there at 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock, whatever. It's being blown off the top and it's coming all this way. So again, not too many thunderstorms in winter flying, but yeah, healthy respect for those puppies,
I've got a comment. I don't have a lot of icing experience, got a lot of cross country. Been in ice a few times where all of a sudden you're losing 10 or 15 knots and you're looking for a place to go. One time that I picked up a lot was on an approach, and I'm mentally listening to everybody and saying, when you're in level flight and you're losing airspeed, it's noticeable. But when you're on an approach, you're in a lower power setting and maybe you don't notice that you're a couple inches higher to keep the speed that you're normally going to be doing. So you've got so many other things going on at that time that you're just not going to necessarily notice that your plane's not operating near as well. So it's just something I've just kind of realized tonight.
Hello, Gary. Haven't seen you in a while. This is George.
I know it. So.
Well, I'd like to make
one thing.
The other scary icing thing that no one's mentioned that I learned about the hard way is whatever your mental rule is, double your caution if you're flying at night. You inadvertently fly into clouds with ice and then it's purely a crapshoot whether to climb or descend. And boy, you sweat bullets as you're building ice, climbing, hoping that the ceiling or the tops are in fact.
CJ, I'd like to weigh in on a number of the questions. One was the pre-flight planning. And I like what Kristin had said. I like to have 3 outs planned before I take off. I try to plan a flight that doesn't fly in ice. I don't fly in ice. You know, the only time that I get ice is usually coming down to land. Very seldom on the climb out because I try to plan the climb out in an area that won't pick up ice. I like to fly on top of everything in the sunshine. And if I do get a little bit going up there, it will sublimate off over time. I like at least 1,000 feet below the icing level where I can melt the ice or it's clear. I won't be picking up anymore. I will not fly at night if it's icing conditions because I can't see the clouds at night. So if I'm going to fly in a condition where I've got to be able to see, you know, besides I got ADS-B weather, I got XM weather, I have all that with me, but I want to be able to see it also. Now, ForeFlight keeps adding products, and some of the products I really like now is they have cloud tops and they have the altitude where the icing occurs in flight, you know, and I won't say real time because, you know, we know it's 10 to 15 minutes delayed, but real time compared to the old days of flying when you got a briefing, drove an hour to the airport, pre-flighted and took off for a 3-hour flight, and your weather information was 5 hours old by the time you got into it. But I used to use a lot of different products. Now I use almost exclusively the products that are in ForeFlight, from the featured stuff to the prog charts to the icing. And I really like the cloud tops, the ceilings, and the icing because you can plan a trip in it. It'll even give you an idea where you might see layers. And then not too many people have mentioned it, but PIREPs are wonderful, especially in the Great Lakes area, because these CJs that are taking off from, you know, the little airports around here in Flint and Pontiac and Detroit, they're flying through that stuff, and they can tell you, you know, I picked up, and they'll say light rime, which to us is going to be moderate or worse, and they'll tell you the altitudes, where they picked it up, where the bases were, where the tops are, and what the concentration was. So those are just some comments that I have on some of the discussion that we've had.
And just if I can piggyback on that, not only will you get those PIREPs, but if you're coming out of an uncontrolled field, but you're talking directly to approach to get your clearance, when you call them for your clearance, ask them. If you're wondering about the layers and icing, ask them when you call to pick up the clearance. They will be happy to get you that information because they'd rather deal with you asking that on the ground than deal with you up in the air when your voice went up about 2 octaves. I've done that out of my home field. We call Tracon directly, and I've said, hey, do you guys have, you know, ceilings were about 2,000 feet. I knew I was going to have to punch through it. I asked them, you got any icing reports? They said, haven't got any reports. Hold on a second, I'll check. And I could hear him kind of move the phone away and call out to the guys on radar. Hey, have you got anybody reported any icing? Hold on, I'll check. And you could hear him in the background calling and asking people. You know, ATC can be your friend before you ever get off the ground.
Amen.
Yeah, Ray, that's a great point, Ray.
Hey, Ron, One of the tools that I haven't heard anybody talk about is when you have the flight plan visible in ForeFlight and you go to profile view, you can actually bring up an icing tool now, which is really just a slice through the atmosphere of the regular icing tool. It gives you a pretty good set of data to look at in a different direction.
Yeah, they keep adding these tools all the time, and I'm really impressed with the cloud and icing tools that they've given us.
Yep.
It may not be as good as your radar on some of the planes, but it's
One
so much better than what we've had in the past.
One word with that though, that's only on the top subscription, the $200 or 200, whatever it is. There is another product out there called Weather Spork. I've used it now for a couple years. I've had really good luck with it. That Scott Denstedt that you had mentioned put it together, and what I like about it is it gives you the weather across your route of flight during the time that you're going to be passing through it. That really kind of ties it all together. I think it's $79 a year for that service. It's called Weather Spork. I've had real good luck with it.
George here. To add to that, the other nice thing about Weather Spork, and I use it too, and I forgot to mention it, but you can there's a slider across the bottom of it, and you can move that slider for your departure time to anywhere you want and see how the weather changes. What if I delayed my departure an hour? How's that going to affect the weather down line? It's really a neat tool. So, like I say, the tools we have available now are certainly different than back when I learned to fly in the Wright Flyer. I'll tell you, it was different.
Does anybody actually use, weather, a weather service anymore? The old WX weather brief. I'm just curious, because what always drove me nuts is I'd call up and I go, hey, I'm here in Florida, in Miami, and I'm flying up to Atlanta or Pensacola. And the first thing the guy goes, well, there's a cold front over Seattle that's affecting the Ohio Valley. And we've got, high winds in New York City. And I'm like, did you just hear where I'm going? I'm going from Miami to Pensacola. I don't know where they get their brief, but anyway, talk about tuning a guy out, if he's not going to give you any relevant information.
Well, under the forecast for if you go to the airports with ForeFlight, you look at the forecast, there's a forecast discussion. And if you read that, that's almost exactly what the briefer must be reading, because sometimes those are word for word what the briefer's telling you.
Right.
The other thing about ForeFlight lately, if I file a course, and I usually just file direct, and then if you're somewhere out east, like in Gaithersburg, Maryland, for instance, they'll give you a route that includes a bunch of Victor Airways and so on. You file, they accept your routing, they give you a routing change. It comes to ForeFlight, automatically goes into your ForeFlight flight plan. And now if you have like the Garmin Connects, Flight Stream 210 or 510, you can then put that into even your old 430s and 530s, which don't accept Victor Airways, but it puts all the waypoints in for the Victor Airway for you. That is really a neat time-saving tool.
Mike Kalini here. I do want to talk about, I don't know, did I mute myself? No, I'm still on here, right? Can you hear me?
You're on.
Yep, you're there.
Okay, great. I use all the tools as well, but one of the tools I use, most people would never even think of, I don't think. I go to the Weather Channel, I go to all of the commercial weather stations that you can get on the internet easily, and I look at I pick out cities that are local that are on my route, and I look at what the Weather Channel says, and I look at what these commercial outfits say. You would be amazed at the perception that you can get from doing that. And I'm not saying don't use all these tools, but I'm telling you, you can enhance that with something as simple as the weather channel.
And I'll kind of pipe on that and on that, along with other tools. Everybody's talking about all these tools and ForeFlight and all ForeFlight, and whenever they come out with a new product, I'm sure I don't sit there and I'm usually doing something else, so I'll just acknowledge it and click on and go about doing whatever I'm doing. I don't sit there and go, oh, let me learn about this new product right now. But YouTube has got a plethora of little short videos, and so you kind of off the subject, but I mean, I don't know anything. I'm helping a guy learn to fly a Comanche who's just had a Garmin 375 put into it. I don't know anything about a 375, but watching YouTube videos over the weekend, I mean, I taught myself how to use it. So, I've got a Garmin 480, kind of old school stuff. So I'm sure possibly, or I would hope that there are possibly short little videos on YouTube of, hey, how do I get this kind of product or something about it? So I don't know. There's some amazing stuff on YouTube that you can pull off and dissect.
One practice I could recommend, there was a question about calling for a weather briefing. Is I can't speak for everybody here, but a lot of the times I'm doing my flight planning on my couch, sitting on my bed, anything like that on ForeFlight. And then I'm going through, checking all the boxes, looking at everything. But then I still have to drive to the airport, and I can't flight plan in the airport. But what I can do is I can call for a weather brief, and I can just sit there in the car and just listen to the weather briefer. Hopefully they're talking about the right part of the country, but I can at least listen and confirm everything that I know. And there have been times when I didn't do that and the weather has changed, whether it's a thunderstorm, I'm down in outside of Savannah that's popped up, that's, affected the flight that I planned, where I got to the airport, pulled the plane out, did everything. And then I look up, at the departure end of the runway, and there's a thunderstorm developing. And, I just think it's an easy thing to do. And there's nothing else you're gonna be doing in the car unless you're calling someone or you're talking to somebody else. It's just easy to sit there for 10 minutes and listen to the weather briefer while you're driving to the airport.
That's true. And actually, this is CJ. I just want to mention, I still call flight service. I'll be talking to ATC. I'll be like, do you mind if I go over to talk to FSS for a moment? They'll tell me to be back in no more than 5 minutes. And if I'm not sure what I'm dealing with, and I think my updates aren't coming through right, I'll just go over to flight service, and they're willing to look at things airport by airport. Sometimes I had one situation where I was flying along, there were unforecast thunderstorms, and I was heading into a thunderstorm box canyon. And I said, I'm trying to go here. And they were like, bad idea. Where would you like to go? And I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know. But I said, well, how about this airport? And they looked and they were like, bad idea. And then I said, well, how about the one underneath me? They were like, yeah, you'll probably make it in there. But they actually took the time to look each time. So calling flight service now becomes looking up the flight service frequencies along my route of flight have become part of my pre-flight planning, because I've been flying some really long distances recently, from Vermont down to Florida and then Florida out to California. And now that's it. Part of my little list that I write down on a piece of paper is what the frequencies are going to be as I go along, just in case I run into something. I'd love to hear, because we've got Kristin and George here and Ron and people who just do tons and tons of flying in difficult conditions. When you guys were, like Kristin, when you were running Part 135, what were the company's procedures for making sure that as much as possible people didn't fly into icing conditions? And if they did, what happened? What were they supposed to do?
We flew in icing conditions all the time. The airplanes were de-iced.
And in the case of Maggie, what would you do for yourself and to handle it?
Oh, Maggie's de-iced also.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. So Kristin Winter Kristin, tell people what's on your airplane, on your PA-30.
Boots, alky props, and a hot plate.
So you got anti-ice and de-ice.
Well, I mean, props and wings and windshield are sort of the, baseline.
Do you have boots on your, on the stabilator, Kristin?
Yes.
And do you have boots inboard of the engines?
Nope.
Okay.
Those are typically overrated.
Yeah, I know they're required, at least on the Barons for known ice, but I agree with you.
Yeah, when they switched over the Navajos from, the grandfathered, icing protection into the certified known icing, the FAA made them add the inboard boots. And I've got about 1,000 hours in the older ones without the inboard boots, and I got about 800 in a known ice Navajo. And those inboard boots do you nothing. It's just not a place that picks up much ice. The wing is fat enough that it tends to divert the ice particles, far enough ahead that it picks it up, so slowly. It's just not really a big issue.
Good.
Yeah,
Well, I wanted to make a comment about the flying in snow. I fly about twice a week, and the last couple of weeks been really crummy here in Michigan, except the last couple of days been great, but before that, I have never picked up ice on my wings flying in snow, and that's flying in snow in the 30-degree snow or 10-degree snow. But what I have got is snow packing that air intake to our, to your air filter there in the front of your plane underneath your prop. Snow will impact there and it will clog that whole area. And then you have to use carburetor heat if you have a carbureted engine like mine as alternate air to keep your engine running. And I've flown at times where I was wondering why I had to use carb heat until I landed and saw all that. And there was no ice anywhere else on the plane, not even on the windshield. But it required carb heat the whole time. And I do have the temperature probe in the carburetor, so I could play with the position of the carb heat to give me just enough warmth to melt that ice and also to bring air in there. But also I had to play with mixture to get the engine to run smoothly too. So I don't know if anybody else has run into that or not with carbureted engines, but that air intake will get ram snow or ice and clog up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've had that at a Comanche too. I also about half of my flying time has either been Minnesota or Upper Michigan. And the most I've ever had flying in snow due to me, I could see that there was just a little bit of it that had stuck to the very tipping point leading edge of the wing. Had no effect on the aerodynamics whatsoever. That's, and it never built from there. It just kind of left a very small layer, maybe a quarter of an inch on either side of the absolute leading edge of the wing. But yeah, snow has never been a problem in my experience.
For whatever it's worth, I've run into it with impact snow into the air cleaner on both a 250 and a 260, and it don't matter whether it's a carburetor or fuel injection, they both do it the same way. And my view on snow is it's a huge problem and somebody brought this up, loss of visibility on approach. Snow can really have your visibility go from just fine to next to nothing in a heartbeat.
Oh yes, snow kills the visibility. You can see down great, but you can't see forward.
It's like jumping into fog.
Well, I'd say it's actually almost worse because you do look down, you see the ground, and you don't realize that you cannot see more than a quarter mile in front of you. You just, because you have no scale out in front of you, and it's fog. You know when you're inside a cloud. Snow can be very deceiving.
Totally agree.
Just a quick, if I can step off of something CJ said about having flight service kind of in the back of your mind, what the frequencies are. Right now, if you've been flying, you may have run into this, but with COVID, a lot of ATC facilities will go what they call ATC 0. They just instantly shut down. And apparently what's happening is a controller gets diagnosed with COVID. They go in and that facility they work in, they pretty much shut down the traffic in that airspace, evacuate the facility, come in and disinfect everything. And it can take 2 or 3 hours before that facility comes back up. In the past week, 3 different centers have gone ATC 0 while I was out working. And if this happens to you, if you're IFR, they're going to deal with you. They'll get you to somebody else. They'll unwind everything. But if you're VFR out there right now and ATC goes ATC 0 and you weren't talking to them, you can find yourself in the middle of about a 300 square miles piece of airspace where there's not going to be anybody to talk to you. So just not directly related, but I just wanted to mention that these days with what's going on, keep flight service in the local frequencies kind of in the back of your head, because that may be your only radio link.
Flight service used to have Flight Watch on 122.0. CJ, what did you look at different flight service station frequencies along your route?
Yep. So George, to answer your question, I don't know if is Flight Watch still happening, or are we just
somewhere? I think they still cover a weather-only frequency, and the beauty of 122.0 was the fact that it was the same frequency across the country, and you can get them anywhere. Now they shut that down a number of years ago. Anybody know
Flight
what
Watch doesn't exist anymore.
Yep.
You still have flight service, but Flight Watch is gone.
Yeah,
so
that was
you
my
have to
understanding.
find the specific frequency that covers flight service station wherever you are. So it makes it a little bit more complicated.
So normally what I do is I look at airports along my route of flight. And generally, if you scroll down through the list of frequencies associated with that airport, the nearest flight service station will be listed. So for most of the areas that I fly in, 122.2 and 122.4 covers most of the East Coast and a lot of the middle of the country. They do. Yep, exactly. And so, but Ray is right. I ran into this flying down to ComancheTown at night, and all of a sudden, with flight following VFR, the controller said, we don't have coverage for the next 90 miles. So we can either reroute you so that you can stay in areas where we do have coverage, or you can pick us back up in about 90 miles. It was such a shock that honestly, I didn't really digest it. You know, I was like, I must have heard him wrong. He just said there's no coverage.
No coverage.
And it was the same thing that Ray said, that somebody in a facility will get COVID or be suspected to have COVID. And as a containment procedure, the standard process apparently is to empty it out. With some stuff they can hand over, because center in general, you know, they'll have one guy covering 5 sectors, but they're still there. But if it's more local, you'll suddenly have no coverage.
Jacksonville Center shut down for 3 hours yesterday, which is why I'm in Dayton and not at home today, because the crew that was supposed to operate my flight home was coming out of Jacksonville, and I decided not to wait 4 hours to see if they got there. But they shut down a huge chunk of, like, seriously 300 square miles of Jacksonville airspace, and just wouldn't let any departures. They wouldn't let anybody in through this huge area from about Gainesville all the way out to the coast. Like, they just, if people couldn't go out over to Gulf, they couldn't leave Florida for 3 hours.
Can't fly IFR, you fly VFR.
Yeah, the airline frowns on that, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. Not gonna happen.
Well, Ray,
No,
that seems to be very common too. Jack Center has shut down numerous times in the past week.
Yeah,
So it's,
and it's all, it's
and of
this.
course, like, you know, in Florida, you can't go anywhere because if you can't talk to Jack Center, well, you can't get to Orlando, you know, you can't get to Miami Center. And so it's a huge mess. But, you know, nobody needs to be going to Miami this time of year anyhow.
No, they don't deserve it, right?
Well, that's why what Ray just said about keeping flight service frequencies at your fingertips. At least you've got a radio link if they go away with somebody. And don't forget that flight service still sometimes uses the over thing. So you'll need to call, say who you are and where you are. So, you know, look at your moving map, and when you call them, you know, you announce that you're such and such a Comanche, and that and then give them, you know, you're 5 miles northwest of such and such airport, and that way they can locate you. They actually need that information. Just a reminder if anybody hasn't talked to flight service for a while. But one thing I wanted to touch on is in reviewing the accident statistics, we had a lot of carb icing accidents. And I realized that this is embarrassing for me to admit, but I'm just going to own up to it and hope that I'm not the only one and that I'm not wasting everybody's time. How and when, Kristin and George and Ron, Keil and everybody, how and when do we use our carb ice, and how and when do we use our pitot heat? And for those flying fuel injected airplanes in conditions that are conducive to icing, what about our air?
George here, let me jump in. And I meant to give you a call earlier actually about this, CJ, but the carb ice situation really it's not a winter phenomenon by any means. You know, I mean, you can get carb ice in Atlanta when it's 70 degrees in the middle of July. So it's strictly a matter of temperature drop and humidity. So I kind of want to point that out, that just because it's not winter doesn't mean you don't have to worry about carb ice. And I also find it interesting that of the only airplanes that I know that are fuel injected that have carburetor heat are Comanches. It's called injector heat, and it's the result, I think, of an AD note. But a short little war story, the first time a Comanche tried to kill me was in upstate New York in the winter, flying through heavy snow in a 260B when it quit. And it was dark. It was in the snow. I was coming down a valley to shoot an approach into my home airport that sits in a valley. And the doggone thing up and quit. And, you know, I flew along, did what I could. And when I dropped out of the bottoms, shortly thereafter, it started running again. So that was nice. But this was before those airplanes had injector heat. And we could never find the real problem, but tend to believe that it was impact snow, you know, that either plugged up the inlet or made its way through and iced up the injector body. And so, yeah, it's interesting that injected Comanches have carb heat. So.
Does that relate to what Ron Keil was, sorry, this is CJ again. Does that relate to what Ron Keil was warning us about? The possible problem that you were running into was impact snow plugging your air inlet? Is that your suspicion, George?
Yeah, that was our suspicion, you know. And of course, by the time you get on the ground, that's the nice thing about icing accidents, is by the time the airplane gets on the ground, there's usually no trace of ice anymore. So, you know, the evidence is gone. And so it makes it tough.
George, you got to tell me a little bit. George, you got to tell me a little bit about this injector heat. I don't think I've ever heard of that before.
Yeah, and I don't know that 400s have it, but 260Bs, 260Cs, injected. I think it's all injected 250, 260 family. There was, I believe, it was an AD note that mandated injector heat, and it's nothing more than carburetor heat setup that sends hot air to the injector body instead of a carburetor.
Huh,
I think
never heard of that.
I think he means the throttle body.
Yeah, the fuel
Right.
circle. We'll use a
Yeah.
simple, yeah. But you
Yeah,
know,
I think
I've only
the
flown a
proper
couple of 400s, so I don't know if it's on a 400 or not.
No, I don't believe it is. No,
Maybe that thing just
I
runs so
think
hot all
proper-
the time, it doesn't matter.
that's what it is.
I don't
It's
think
on
I
a
got it on my
260 for
260.
sure, and you better pre-flight it if you're going into anything like an IFR or cold environment. You better make sure it works, because if you don't, the engine will stop running. I've run into it.
Yeah, just to let you know, I think they call that the alternate air source. And I have it on my twin and my 1965 260.
Absolutely,
actually something
exactly
different, Bob.
correct. It's called the alternate air.
No, this is
Well,
something different. There's alternate
yeah,
air.
the alternate air is
Alternate
alternate air is just
Alternate air pulls
it's
air out of the
automatic.
cabin. The
Alternate
alternate
air
air
is just a
goes
spring.
through the exhaust. It takes heat off the exhaust pipe and brings it into the servo.
Just like carburetor heat does.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the airplanes that have it, you'll see, usually it's a chrome push button knob, just like the
You are correct.
cow flaps on a twin Comanche.
Yeah.
And it says injector heat on it instead of alternate air.
Correct.
So now
No,
maybe
mine
it's not an
says
AD.
alternate-
Not all
mine
airplanes
says
have it. Maybe it was a
alternate air.
service bulletin. But
I've got a 69 that says alternate air source.
what model
69
airplane?
twin. Twin Comanche, 69.
Yeah, the twin
C
Comanches
model.
don't have it. Because again, there's no muffler on a twin Comanche.
George. No, they do. It's right by the cowl flaps. Right below the cowl flaps, there's two there that are alternate air.
Yeah, they're alternate
I've
air.
got it-
But they're not
okay, now hang on. Mine is also turboed. That may be a difference there. But yeah, it's definitely there. I know the airplane.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
George,
no,
I've got
I
that.
agree. My 64 has alternate air too. We're talking about two different items though.
George,
mine- Yeah, it-
mine's
They
got
all have alternate air.
Passenger side,
Mine's got a
aluminum lever you pull out. When you flew it, it was sitting by your left knee.
Okay, that heating system is a part of a service bulletin, Piper Service Bulletin 861, and there's an AD that references it for the 260 fuel injecteds to a manually operated heated alternate air induction system.
Yeah,
And
apparently
I
they
presume
had.
that's what you're referring to. It's a kit that you were able to add under that service
You're
bulletin.
correct.
Yeah. What's that
Apparently
service
they had the spring loaded one where the spring was failing and causing it to stick open apparently. And that's when we went to the AD that you're talking about.
So the kit is, well, doesn't reference the kit. It just says service bulletin. It references a kit per Piper Service Bulletin 861. And apparently AD 912109 references that kit or that service bulletin. I have a 250, so I've never run into it before, but.
Now, how about on the twin where twin turbo? I've got it right with the right next to the air cleaner and the turbo assembly. There's an alternate air source right there.
Well, as I understand it, any fuel injected is required to have an alternate air source, whereas carbureted would have carb heat, was my understanding of it.
Okay, I'll buy that.
This is just a heated alternate air source, which I think is fairly unique.
I
Okay.
have a twin too, and my alternate air door in the turbo system. I mean, when I first got it, it still does actually. It's a known gremlin that they cause turbos to lose boost pressure because they leak the forced air.
Okay.
There was another issue on somewhat similar issue on carbureted 250s. I know I have one and it has a disease in spades. And that is in the subject of carburetor ice. My Comanche will pick up carburetor ice in the middle of summer. So much so that I have a carburetor air temperature installed in my airplane. And it's really insidious because the carburetor ice forms very, very slowly. And it will take 3 or 4 minutes to lose 1 inch of manifold pressure. But when you're in cruise, you really don't notice until suddenly you notice that you lost 10 miles an hour. It happens, well, the 2 times it's really happened badly, there was no haze anywhere. These were both up in Canada where there's no pollution to cause haze because there's nothing for the water to coalesce, the water vapor to coalesce on. There's no pollution, but it's still there, and it sure likes to coalesce on a carburetor innards.
I
Interesting.
think that's a great point because I have seen carburetor ice on my 250 in the summer. It's not just a winter problem. And I've seen it when the engine was operating at full throttle. It just happens.
Mm.
So my dad wrote an article called Ice in a Summer Cloud when he was over Florida and picked up carb heat or carb ice, had to use carb heat, which got the engine to start back up. And then after he got out of the cloud, he turned off the carb heat and the engine stopped again. So he ran carb heat until the air filter had enough time to melt. And you can get that article. It's still Google archived in Flying Magazine.
Aaron, that's a good one. This is CJ. There were a couple of accidents in Comanches, and I was totally curious about this, hoping Kristin and George and Ron and everybody else can weigh in, where these are from the 80s and 90s. Comanche's flying along. It picks up, the engine starts to run rough or lose power, which are classic carb ice signs. Pilot puts in carb heat, things smooth out. They take out their carb heat, and then they reported putting it back in again and the engine stopping. And I had seen things saying, don't run with partial carb heat, you'll get more ice in there. But, and then having trouble restarting the engine. These are really old. They weren't necessarily at the time when they were getting the best data. But can we talk about the proper use of carb ice and what your engine's gonna do when you melt a whole bunch of water?
Well, I can weigh in a little bit because I'm glad that Hank made the comments that he did, because I've had people tell me that Comanches don't get carb ice. And yet I've become very good friends with my carb ice over the years. And it doesn't matter what time of the year. But I'm almost always full throttle because I like to fly at the higher altitudes. And I will pick up ice, carb ice at, with full throttle. I do have it. It came with the plane was the carb air temperature, and it's pretty good. If the temperature is in the red area, which is the freezing area, I start looking at my manifold pressure, and if I see it going down, a half an inch, I'll start using carb ice. And my first approach is to pull it all the way out for 15 seconds and then put it back in again. And if the manifold pressure goes back up, I won't touch it again until I start losing it again. Then I'll do the same thing over again. If it's continuous, if that isn't working as well, I will pull it out to where my temperature gauge shows me above freezing, 35 to 40 degrees. And I'll just leave it in that position and fly, because I don't have to pull the mixture back as much when I do that. And the engine seems to run smoother. But I'll use between manifold pressure and the carburetor air temperature, to determine how much carb heat to use. So I don't know if that helps any or not.
Yeah, no, that's a nice tool having a carb air temperature gauge like that. That's excellent. One of the things I have a question for the group in general is when you apply carburetor heat, how do you know the ice is gone?
Well, it's when you put it on, if you had ice, your engine's going to sound worse than it was before you pulled the carb heat on.
Okay.
Start coughing and spitting and sounding terrible. And then it will clear up.
And
And
not for very long.
well, but long enough when you don't know what's going on and you pull a lever and suddenly your engine is running a lot worse than it was a minute ago. It feels long enough. But when the engine comes back and starts running smooth again, you've gotten rid of the ice. The water is now, it's melted, it's run through your engine, and it's 5 seconds, maybe 10. And then you just put the carb heat back in and you'll feel you can feel the mixture change, and you've shed the ice by that point. I usually let it stay on for another 10 or 30 seconds after it's running smooth again, just to make sure. And then I'll put it back in. Now I'm just, and the one thing I'd say is, at least in my airplane, what I've noticed is when I get carb ice, I get it hard and I get it fast. It doesn't slowly build in mine. I'm cruising along and all of a sudden I'm like, what is going on? I'm slowing down. And I look, about the time I notice I've slowed down 10 knots and I look over and the manifold pressure's down, about then the engine is ready to quit. And that's, so it's to the point where even before I'm pulling up on the yoke, I'm leaning over to grab the carb heat, because that's just how my airplane seems to react. I don't know why.
Do you have carburetor air temperature, Ray?
I do now. That's one of that. When I went to an engine monitor, that was one of the must add-ons that I put on there.
Because I notice if I'm, and I don't even have to be in visible moisture. If the humidity is high, and you can tell that by the temperature dew point. Humidity is high, or if the clouds are nearby. If that temperature is starting to go, is in that frozen area, because normally it'll be, if it's really cold, it'll be way off to the left. If it's warmer, it'll, be 40, 50, 60 degrees. But if it's in that freezing area, I start watching my manifold pressure. And if I see a change, I usually catch it then. I've never had the situation where I had a lot. I'm usually able to get it before that point. And the way I tell, when you pull a carburetor heat out, the manifold pressure will go down even further. Then when you push it back in, if it goes back to where it was before you got it, you got rid of the ice. If it doesn't go back, then you better add a little more. But
I will say I haven't run into it often. Like it's not one of those recurrent, like top of mind things, but when I've had it, maybe 5 times in 1,100 hours in the airplane, when I've gotten it, it got my attention. Just seemed to come on pretty quick.
The alerting system that I have uses a light beam across the venturi. And before you get ice to break the beam, oftentimes you will get condensation, which will also trigger the alarm.
Okay.
But without the condensation, you're not going to get the ice.
So you actually have an ice detector, not just a temperature probe.
That's right, an ice detector. I don't have a temperature probe at all in there.
Okay.
You don't need it.
Right. A place to get the temperature probe for the carb is in the chat window. Some of the folks are posting. Apparently Aircraft Spruce has it, and George just mentioned ACS also has probes. Everybody, there's been a So first of all, it's almost 9:30 and clearly we need to have a winter flying 3. This is CJ. There's been a really animated discussion in the chat window with a couple of consensuses. It looks like weather spork is really popular. There's a consensus that the new weather planning tools that ForeFlight has, especially this, I think it's called like a graphical briefing, is really good. And windy.com seems to have a lot of votes. And so let's see, that's where to get a carb air temp system, a couple of places. Let's see, weather spork, windy, ForeFlight's weather planning tools seem to be getting a lot of happy votes. I wanted to ask, so because I apologize because we came into this with a plan and I ended up having something happen and I wasn't able to send the Comanche accidents that we had planned to center this discussion around. We've had a fantastic discussion. Oh, SKUT, yes, SKUT prologue for tops and bottoms and icing levels. SKUT came up a bunch of times and Ray Burton just reminded us. So those seem to be the top ones for weather planning. The reason I'm taking a moment to emphasize it is because right before this, I was talking with a Comanche pilot who's responsible for violating us when we screw up. And he said, please, you know, guys, talk about good weather planning tools. I wanted to ask Ron Keil to repeat his guidelines, because one of the things that people may have gotten the misimpression about is we're like, yeah, you can fly into icing. No, we're not saying that. But Ron, you had mentioned some guidelines about you plan your flights so that you're not going to be climbing out into icing conditions. And there are times when you leave your plane in the hangar. I don't know if you had written them down, but if you remember them, could you repeat the guidelines that you use? You said that you sometimes pick it up on the descent, but rarely on the climb out. And you had a couple other things you said. Would you mind repeating them for us? Because I know they come from years of experience.
Well, to start with, I used to use all the tools outside, you know, before I had ForeFlight. Now I almost exclusively use ForeFlight, but I have to admit I do use WeatherBug, which does get its information from National Weather Service. And WeatherBug, I can quickly go to different cities and see what their forecast is for them. But I use the all the features in ForeFlight, and I want to know the amount of moisture in the air. You know, I like to fly areas where I don't care if there's clouds as long as it's fairly dry air, because it's always cloudy in Michigan this time of the year. And, you know, you don't really pick up ice all the time when it's cloudy. You just pick it up when there's moisture, a lot of moisture in those clouds. So I try to find corridors where it's drier. I try to find areas. I want to make sure I've got some ceiling. I really like to have, you know, the ground to be above freezing and 1 or 2 or 3,000 feet above freezing before I get to the ground, so that if I do happen to pick up some ice, I can go back down and melt it before I get to the ground level. I don't want to take off and climb to 12 or 13 or 14,000 feet in ice. I want to take off and maybe 3,000 or 4,000 feet in the air, find a, you know, if it's overcast, a little thin 1,000 or 2,000 foot layer that doesn't have any ice or none reported in, that I can pop through, get in the sunshine and finish my climb in the sunshine. I like flying up in the sunshine this time of the year because we don't see much on the ground. And as far as 3 Alps, you know, one is either clear or above freezing temperatures, far enough above the ground that I can fly around without hitting anything. And another is a direction, you know, either east, west, south, or north from my route that will get me into clear air. And another is the tops. I'd rather be high than low. Because if I'm up there at a higher altitude, I have more time to make more choices. I do keep that ring on ForeFlight that shows my glide distance at any point, so that I know what airports I can get to, and if I were to run into a problem. I will not fly in icing conditions at night. It has to be daytime, because in addition to, you know, the ADS-B and the XM or Sirius weather, I really like to be able to look out and see it too. I have found in most of my experience, the most of the ice, or at least the higher concentration of ice, is in the top third of the clouds. So if I'm in a layer and I'm bumping up against the bottom of another layer, I don't tend to get as much ice as if I'm sitting at the top of a layer. So I try to find layers in between the clouds. And again, PIREPs can give me all that information. So I study those for the route. Those are a few things that I think about, CJ.
Mm-hmm. And that is incredibly helpful because of the experience you come from. I'd love to ask Kristin and George to weigh in with their comments, because you've built this kind of great skeleton or framework of guidance.
George here. Yeah, Ron, that was a great list. You know, I wholeheartedly agree with all that pre-flight planning and your thought behind it. I usually go high too, mainly because, you know, I'm cheap and it burns less gas if I go up there. But the other thing is, if I do find myself encountering any ice, and I try to plan as best I can not to get in it, because again, our airplanes have no real ice capabilities for all practical purposes. But you know, one of the things I learned was, as soon as you start picking up ice, I usually head high, because there will become a point where I can no longer climb. So I'll climb while I can. And ice accretion layers are generally, and I use the term generally because Ron Ward mentioned a rather thick layer, but generally they're only 2,000 to 3,000 feet thick. So, you know, if you're in the middle of the ice, or you're in the middle of a cloud layer, and you start picking up ice, an altitude change of just a couple of thousand feet can make a lot of difference. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be that. You know, I flew around in the Great Lakes as a dumb youth for a commuter airline. And, you know, we went to Detroit, Cleveland, the UP. I mean, you know, I was in the ice from November until May. And the airplanes we had carried it well. But one thing I learned is ice is very fickle. Or at least that's my view of it. You know, you can be behind the guy that's reporting, no, the ice is terrible, the ice is awful, you know, and you're right behind him a couple of miles, saying, going into an airport, and you're not picking up anything, and you're thinking, I wonder what's going on. And then two guys behind you land, and they taxi up to the gate, and they look like a popsicle, and you're thinking, well, where were you? Well, I was 5 miles behind you. So planning for ice is all well and good, but until you actually get in there and get wet, it's kind of hard to know what's going to happen. Has been my experience. The other thing I'll just add to Ron's list is, as far as flight planning goes, I oftentimes go from the Midwest to the East Coast. And while if you're going from Lapeer to Marquette, this may not work very well. But if I'm going from Omaha to Binghamton, I'll take a look at the weather and the temperatures. And, you know, we fly speedy little airplanes. So if I have to go south around Indianapolis to stay in warm air, because because it's cold over Cleveland and Toledo, I don't mind spending another, 5 gallons of gas and 15 minutes of flight time to stay out of the ice. So it's another thought that some people may or may not consider.
Good one.
May I ask?
Chris, go ahead, Hank, and then Kristin.
Something I always do when I talk to weather breathers is ask them if they believe the forecast. They have to put out a forecast. It doesn't have to be right. And many times I've had them say, we haven't got a clue what's going to happen.
Oh, to
No,
Hank's point,
we're laughing about that, but depending on if you read some of these forecasts in different areas on ForeFlight, you'll see the different personalities that write them.
Yes.
And
Yep.
Greensboro is awesome because they tell you stuff that, oh, there's indications of this, but we don't believe it, so it's not in the report for now, but they included it. A lot of other areas don't. So that's a serious thing to ask them, because you'll also get a sense of, is the guy reading a script or is he actually giving you his interpretation? And now you know what you're doing.
And Kristin,
sorry.
Wait, Kristin, before you take off, I wanted to grab your comments if you still can. I know you've got to go. Unless we lost her. Yep. So Kristin had to drop off. She said bye. And Ray, that was actually a super helpful comment. George Merriam, you've been teaching people for 50 years. Any comments?
Yeah, there's a couple of items that you can look up on the internet. One is Twister Data. That's a SKU-T, Twister Data. The other one is RUC Soundings. That's the NOAA organization. RUC Soundings will give you the weather conditions from the surface to 40,000 feet. In order to have icing, you have to have freezing temperatures and visible moisture. The SKU-T has temperature dew point that goes all the way up, so you can tell where the clouds are and where the tops are usually. And then pilot reports. You can't beat pilot reports. The other thing is personal minimums. Use your personal minimums. And like Mike said, he doesn't fly as long as it's cold and he can see the moisture. That's his personal minimums. I think personal minimums are important. And I always said, there's two things you don't do in a single engine airplane, and that's fly in IFR conditions and fly at night. To be safe, that's what you can do, but we're not going to do that. So know where the clouds are, know where the freezing level is, and pre-flight planning.
And do you concur, George, that as far as the pre-flight planning, what do you do? Like what's your...
Works. Yeah, ForeFlight works.
Yeah.
But what they said too, I believe it was Mike as well, is he starts watching television the night before, just to get an idea of your local weather. But if you can, I have a weather device. It's called Aero Weather. And if I'm going to fly the East Coast, I have points equidistant all the way down the East Coast. So if you click on that, you can see the surface weather at a glance. And it's all color coded. So if you have some problems along the way, you can get into that section. But you can't beat Prague report. It all works together. The Prague charts, and now with the new stuff for ForeFlight, icing reports, wind, which way the wind's blowing, what's causing the moisture to move. You have to have freezing temperature and moisture, and it depends on what altitude you're going to use too. So know the weather before you go.
Mm. It is 9:30. Pete, if you're there, do you...
I'm here.
Sounds like we should wrap up recording.
That sounds like a good plan to me, because I'd like to get home tonight too, but it has been terrific. I think we've got the balloon up higher enough that everybody can see it now. And I'm sure that there is going to be a number 3 and a number 4 on this topic because we haven't even gotten to the second and third part. So with that, yes, I am going to end the recording. It will be available probably tomorrow by mid-morning on the Comanche, northeastcomanche.org website. And I will also save the chat thing. I'll edit it a little bit to take out some of the private stuff. Other than that, the chat one will be available also as a text file. So for me, good night.